We're a nonprofit art service organization focused on supporting the career development of people who work in the arts. We work in support of all disciplines and creative practices. Now, most people know us for our popular job board, but we also conduct workforce research, we create and host career resources, and we develop, adapt, and deliver training, such as the programming you're part of today. We do this work throughout Ontario, giving us an opportunity to connect with people in many different regions and communities. However, our office and our core team, including myself, are joining you today from the meeting place of Toronto, or Tekaronto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional land of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And of course, today is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. And we're grateful to have the opportunity to connect with people on this land and others through these virtual types of sessions and also in person. Now, a little bit more about where this programming is coming from. So our session today is part of our Working in the Arts Resources and Pathways for Newcomers. This is a pilot program funded by Canada Council for the Arts and has been informed by a needs assessment we conducted a few years ago called Navigating Your Career in the Arts for Newcomers, where we explored the barriers and opportunities faced by new Canadians looking to start or expand their creative careers in Canada. And all of the resources we've developed so far are hosted on our website, and we're looking forward to adding more. So please do make sure to follow our progress on those resources. And that really brings us to today's session, where Betty will help us better understand and hone our stories so that we can support our creative careers. In terms of our agenda, we're going to be starting off with a presentation from Betty on what we might think in terms of mapping and defining our paths. From there, we'll move into the workshopping component, which will involve some prompts and group discussion and reflection. And we'll wrap things up with a question and answer period. And during that question and answer period, we will invite you to keep your questions as broad or as general as possible if you can, so that other people in the room can benefit. So that's enough from me. Without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Betty to get us started. Welcome, Betty.
Hello. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Give me a thumbs up. Great. I'm just going to share my screen now. Just give me a second. So awesome. Steph, if you can let me know whether you can see my screen, full screen.
I can see your full screen. It looks great, Betty.
Great, perfect. So thank you everyone for coming here today for workshop. I see some, I'm looking forward to make some connections and meet all of you. I also see my friends from the Region Park Film Festival here in the audience. I want to give you a shout out for supporting this and coming to this event. Before I start, I just want to give a big thank you to Stephanie, Naomi, Brianne, and the whole team at Working Culture for making this workshop and other trainings for newcomers artists possible, and for collaborating with me to develop this session. So as Steph mentioned a bit about me, I am a career coach, fundraising consultant, and a filmmaker. And I am a 1.5 generation immigrant, meaning I immigrated to Canada with my family in my teenage. Growing up, I've always been that kid that doesn't really completely belong to one camp or the other. Among the arts kids, I was always the one who loved math. And among a group of science and math kids, I was always the artsy kid. So even though after I entered the workforce and work in the arts sector, it took me a long time to embrace the fact that I'm a multi-passionate person. And I realized that I'm not alone. That's why I created the 4 creative archetype quiz that you should have seen in the registration site for this workshop. And if you have taken the quiz, I encourage you to share with us in the chat so that we can see what your results are. And if you haven't taken the quiz, don't worry, we'll put the link in the chat. If I can ask Naomi for your help to put a link in the chat, and you can take it now or later after the workshop. Enough about me. This workshop is really about you. Why are you here today? And I'm going to make a guess that you're here today because you're interested in this topic of storytelling. Storytelling about yourself is literally shows up at every single stage about opportunity seeking, job seeking, whether you're thinking to get new employment, mentorship, or you're building your independent practice from ground up in Canada. or if you're putting yourself out there to try to get funding or grants for your creative projects. I want to acknowledge right off the back that storytelling about yourself can feel especially challenging when you've uplifted yourself from another country and rebuilt your career here in Canada. You literally transported and transformed that version of yourself from another place and trying to translate that into a new context. Not to mention, not all of us want the same thing in our creative career, and not all of us have the same creative orientation. And that's why I created a quiz. And in a second, we're going to go a little bit deeper about the 4 types. But before that, I want to let you know what we're going to cover today. So first, we're going to do the overview of the 4 creative archetypes. And then I'm going to connect the dots between creative archetypes and storytelling and share with you why the elevator pitch model is not necessarily serving us in this process. Then I'm going to show you an alternative model in telling stories about yourself. And then I will end the presentation part of this workshop with key strategies for each creative archetypes for embracing their stories. Then we will transition to peer learning and sharing, where we encourage you to share some of your experience, as well as Q&A. I want to remind you, as Stephanie said, as the presentation goes on, if you have any burning thoughts and questions you want to leave in the chat, feel free to do so. We will make sure to circle back in the Q&A as best we can. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about the 4 creative career archetypes. I developed this framework after hundreds of hours working with, coaching, as well as talking with fellow creatives. And what I find is that a lot of the personality tests out there, and I love personality tests, by the way, they really only tell us what we like to do. And don't really take into account that as our career gets developed, it takes on different shapes. Hence, when I was synthesizing my finding and designing this workshop, I consciously chose memorable shapes to describe the kinds of creative paths that we are leading, rather than fixated on the person that you are necessarily. So on the top left quadrant, we have parallel universes. These types of creative career are multifaceted and like to have different paths they developed, not necessarily to overlap. So literally co-holding parallel and coexisting universes. I always like to use myself as a good example for this. I run my coaching and consulting business, and I also make films. Those things on an everyday basis don't overlap very much. When we move to the lower left quadrant, we got constellation. Like parallel universe, these types of creatives signifies that the creative also like to do multiple things as well. But in this case, the dots are connected. Likelihood is we find that in the constellation type of creatives, they jump from slightly different interests and fields in their career and have made multiple jumps. I've coached creatives, for instance, who have literally worked in music, in film, in theater, and all hold slightly different positions in those organizations. Then when we shift right to the lower right quadrant, we got spiral galaxy. Like constellation, they like to expand their career and meet new challenges, especially in a collaborative setting with others. But when we track back the journey, there is like a clear focus in their interests. A good example of this is, say, a graphic designer. A graphic designer can work in different industry for different clients and for different organizations. But what persists is that the person's craft is graphic design. Then last but not least, we got solar system on the upper right quadrant. These are the creators, like parallel universes, like to dance to the beat of their own drum. And although they might still have different facets in their practice, there's a central force like the sun that holds everything together. And a photographer, such as a photographer, for example, who does commercial photography, portraits, and arts photography, is a good example of this type. Why am I introducing these 4 types? Throughout this course of this presentation, what I want you to do is keep this framework in mind as a primer to look at how different types of creatives can channel storytelling differently or similarly. And if you already strongly identify with one type, or you took the quiz and know your type, I strongly encourage to lean into the strength of your specific type. Because guess what? When we talk about storytelling about yourself and putting yourself out there, what we want to create is an upward spiral like this. The more natural you feel about yourself and your story, the more at ease you show up to any professional setting to talk about it naturally. And when you carry your story with that authentic energy, it can be infectious. People are more likely to drawn to people who are genuine and honest. And so that is more likely to create the deep connections that you need to create opportunities for yourself. So shall we dive in a little bit about storytelling then? In the chat, I want to take a moment to ask you, how many people here have heard of this phrase, elevator pitch? If you have, please put yes in the chat. I'm just going to give you a second to respond. I'm seeing lots of yeses. Yes. So as you heard, I come from a film background. I'm a filmmaker. I hear this phrase all the time. Very like from pretty much day one in my filmmaking career, I was told that in order to pitch a film idea, and that in order to pitch a film project, we need to have a succinct and compelling summary about what the film is about. And the pitch has got to be short enough so that if you somehow get into an elevator ride with someone that is potential collaborator, funder, or talent, you're able to intrigue them before they get out of the elevator with you. Sounds magical, right? And I would say this is not just in the film world that we get obsessed over elevator pitch. I see this obsession literally everywhere in our job searching or opportunity seeking journey. Since I became a career coach, I often got questions like this. How do I explain myself in that top line in LinkedIn profile with all that I do? How do I perfect my artist statement on my website? The underlying assumption behind these questions is this. If we are able to perfect that one sentence or one paragraph about ourselves, we are good. We are able to get that opportunity that we want. But what if I tell you that elevator pitch is a myth and is grossly overrated? Because when we focus so much in that one rehearsed perfected pitch about ourselves, we are imagining that career connections are made in this manner: linear, immediate, and singular. I pitch, therefore I should get some kind of result and handshake and leave the room. But in actuality, making career connections, as we all know, looks more like this. Multi-directional, sometimes feels a little bit like haphazard, multi-layer, and often takes several touch points. Your story is much more complicated than one sentence or one paragraph. Wouldn't you agree? You're more than your artist statement. On the other end, the elevator pitch approach often forgets that the other person, quote unquote, in the elevator with you is also a complex human being and not just a passive listener. They are coming to this encounter in this moment in time with you with all of their context, how they're doing that day, of their story. So very rarely, really, that any given human being is able to digest an other person's brilliance or complexity in one sentence or one paragraph. And truly, when was the last time that you got into an elevator ride and pitched other people? If you were able to accomplish that, let me know your secret tricks. But I rarely had those encounters. And even if I did, I rarely were able to make the kinds of deep connection that we need to actually secure a collaboration, a job, or a project opportunity. So in the and also in the context of newcomers seeing opportunity, I see that one of the biggest potential barrier is that if we put so much at stake with perfecting this one top paragraph in our resume or in our cover letter, that when we go apply for jobs and opportunities nowadays with those keywords filtering function, we are running to the risk of, like, if we don't match in that first round, we don't have any fallback. And I know this is especially important for newcomers because translating your past experience into the Canadian context, you can meet with some barriers and resistance. And to match with exactly what Canadian employers are looking for can be very difficult. Now, listen, I'm not trying to deny that there will be a time that we need a resume, we need a cover letter, and sometimes we need a website and or artist statement. You probably do need those things in the technicality of applying for opportunity. I have those things myself. What I'm simply trying to do today in this workshop is encourage us to broaden the probability and increase the probability of making connections. Instead of banking everything in one narrative and one paragraph, how can we broaden that and feel equipped to tell stories about the different facets of ourselves so that we can show up confidently in any given situation where there's an opportunity to make a connection? So to break down even further, for those of you who are parallel universes and constellation type in the audience, you probably have this pain point. How do I tell someone all that I've done and all that I'm interested? And do I appear over the place? Do I appear too scattered? On the other end, for solar system and spiral galaxy type, you're probably worried that because you've been quite focused in one craft on one path, that how do you show expansion and growth? And how do you show that you have other transferable skills? So let me propose to you an alternative model in thinking about your storytelling. I want to encourage you to think about your story like a Rubik's Cube. We all know that a cube has multiple sides, and usually a typical cube will have different colors. And so what I want you to encourage you to do is brainstorm stories that represent each facet of yourself and develop a story bank. On the screen, I gave a couple examples here of what those sides of yourself we can think about. For instance, let's start with your strengths and skills. What is one story that you can tell about something that you know how to do very well? Work and live experience. If you're newcomers, guess what? You're all united by the experience of migration. What have you learned from that significant experience of restarting your life from ground up in a new country? What strengths have you developed from that experience of migration that you can translate to a work setting? Then we got unique perspective and thought leadership. I will argue that this aspect is especially important if you're thinking to start a creative business. Tell me what are the unique opinions and thought that you have about your industry or your craft. And maybe we can talk about your artistic process instead. If you're a filmmaker, your way of filmmaking is definitely going to be very different from my way of filmmaking. Tell me, what's your process? What's your preferred process, and what's your opinion on that? You see, when we start to break down these facets of ourselves and ask ourselves the right questions, there is so much that we can tell about ourselves. And I bet those stories are very compelling and moving than just the factual stuff that we list on our CV or resume. So essentially, what I want you to do after this workshop, and maybe if you're already kind of starting to like put some notes on a piece of paper, is brainstorm 1 to 2 stories about each facet for yourself. And you can think of the different facets beyond the example I gave you. And if I were to encourage you to take one step further, once you have those first drafts of like the list of stories, what are 1 to 2 defining story or keystone story that can actually potentially represent multiple sides of yourself? So at this point, like you might be like, how do I get started? What's a good story? And how do I get started brainstorming? So I wanted to provide you some starting questions here for you to brainstorm. Think of like, what's the most interesting career or artistic opportunity you've had? And then think of those examples or moments and ask yourself some more detailed questions. What are the factors that contributed to your success or process? What skills and experience did you utilize in that process? What are some obstacles that you face, if any, and what strengths of yours did you leverage to find a solution? What did you learn from this experience? These questions are really there to unpack an incident that sometimes we might, or example, a story that sometimes we might brush it off. Oh, I did that so natural, or that was so easy for me. That's not worth mentioning. I've heard those things. But oftentimes, it is those invisible traits that we don't talk about explicitly that lies into our unique strengths, and things that you find easy and find natural to do is not obvious to another person. And again, to further break it down, remember what I said, lean into your type. If you're parallel universe and constellation, have fun brainstorming. What are the things that precisely because you have multiple interests and multiple paths, perhaps, that were able to allow you to face a situation or solve a problem or like leverage those multiple sides of yourself that other people might not be able to. And on the other end, if your solar system is spiral gassy, I would say to you this: first of all, be unapologetic that you've been focused and really delve deep and asking yourself, what is it about this thing? Like, let's say is photography. What is it about photography that make me persist so long and continue to have such fascination? I bet there is some good stuff there about your passion and your personal attachment to that craft. And at times when you do get to like answer the question, transferable skills and other skills other than your focus, ask yourself, in support of your central focus, what supplementary skill have you gained intentionally and unintentionally? I have to tell you, I've coached like creators who come to me, and in my coaching room, like they might come to me and they say, I'm a visual artist. But in one coaching session, I realized, wait, they're a master in like group facilitation and communicate engagement because they've done this and that, utilizing their visual art skill, just to give an example. So oftentimes we are more than, again, it just proves the point that we are more than our label. And there's definitely, I know this for a fact, if you're arts administrator, you're artist, that there's so many administrative, business, and other skills that you have developed inadvertently to support your own practice. So once you got the story bank down, step 2 is to strategically present those different stories, right? And I will add a mini step there, which is listen. What do I mean by that? So let's break down the first half of that step, which is quite clear. I want you from today on to feel like you're a magician. Think about when we go see a magic show. We rarely see the magician trying to pull 5 tricks at the same time on stage, or try to pull like 5 stuff from the hat. They usually pull it one by one and have like a sequence. Why is that? Because pulling 5 tricks on the stage at the same time doesn't work. You will overwhelm the audience. There's a sequencing that like a magician is like carefully created. That's the kind of mindset that I want you to channel when you're presenting your story bank. At any given situation, think about what's the impression that you do want to leave this room or this person, and how can you intrigue the person or audience in front of you? Which story from your story bank can best achieve that in the most effective way? Then, don't forget, as I said, pause and listen and really observe the person or organization or the audience that you want to make a connection with. Because when we are talking about storytelling about yourself, our goal is trying to establish some kind of connection. And to do that, we need to remember that a connection is a two-way exchange. Imagine you're meeting someone at a coffee shop for the first time for a chit chat. And all that has happened in that chat is that that person tells you their life stories and goes on and on and on. And not a single time does that person stop and ask you, what about you? How's your day? What would you feel about that encounter walking away? Of course, that's a bit of like an extreme example. I want to give you a bit of like a more ambivalent example. So nowadays we use linking to make connections a lot. I'm sure everybody gets like linking messages or sends linking message quite a bit. I do too. I get lots of linking message. Sometimes it's spam, sometimes it's not. Sometimes like I use it quite a bit every day. So what I did here is I picked 2 cold call messages that I got from strangers, complete strangers. I don't know who they are. I received from this past year, and I obviously edited it down quite a bit. I changed some of the detail so that to keep the anonymity, but I retain some of the spirit and intention of the message. Take a look from message A and B. And as I read it out loud, like start thinking about if you were me, which one you would say yes to connect with. So on here, message A, we got, hey, Betty, I'm a student. I just got into this film program. I was wondering it's good for my career. Wondering if you have any advice. Thank you. Message B, good day. I've heard lots of good things about you and your work from, and then they name a person. I just recently collaborated with them on a project. I hope we can establish a connection here and explore future collaboration opportunity. All the best with your ongoing project. I just want to pause there and see if you were me, who would you choose to say yes to? I see B, one answer from Yanis. I see lots of B, and yes, one more info from A. Thanks, Stephanie. So it's a bit of a tricky question, right? Because I would say both of this message come from a good intention. But I have to say, message B does make it so much easier for me to say, click the yes button right away, because it clearly showed that before this moment, this person had done some work researching or understanding what I do, even though we don't know each other. And it didn't feel like there was immediate expectation for me to do anything drastic. And I appreciate that because, you know, sometimes when we message each other, we might be catching each other on a bad day or a busy day. And I don't know whether like sometimes I can like, you know, pause and really answer a message for a lengthy time. And it feels like it was just a door opening and it was a no-brainer to say yes. Whereas message A, actually thought about it long and hard and actually returned to the message a couple of times. But the part that I couldn't really like make a decision on was whether this actually was a spam, to be honest, because I had no indication. It was just lacking even a little. I needed a little bit more of a self-introduction. The program that they name, I can see why they think that like another film person can answer, but really has no connection with me, like that much connection with me. And it didn't seem like it seemed like I needed like to one of the point I think it was Brienne could make, like it seemed like a lot of like work, like a lot of context clarifying questions were needed in order for me to respond. And I want to respond, I think I would have responded if they had asked like, can we give Jim a call to make a connections, so on and so forth, but it felt like I had to answer right away. So because I have to confess, solely because I wasn't sure this is a spam, I can mentally make a note. I say, okay, if this is very important to this person, I think they would follow up so that I can see whether this is spam. And that person never did. So, which brings me to the next point, which is everybody's least favorite message, repetition, and focus on quality connections. We live in a world where attention span is extremely low, whether we like to acknowledge it or not. I found this sex 8.25 seconds, apparently according to a study done in 2000. In the 2000, we are 2023 now. I'm sure the span, attention span has only gone lower. But in fundraising and marketing, as a fundraising consultant, I always tell organizations I work with, it takes 7 to 9 touch points for a potential donor to click on a campaign. So when we put those two stacked together, it's no wonder that people need repeated reminders. And I just want to make a disclaimer. I'm not saying that everybody from today on should just bombard everybody's inbox every day. But certainly after a reasonable amount of time, a follow-up does not hurt. And I want to give you a personal example. I think I do an okay job reminding people what I do in all my communication. I put my email signature here. If you email me for my work email, that's what you see. This is my Instagram. Just 2 days ago, I got a message from a friend and said, oh my God, I feel so bad. I never knew that you did a podcast. And this happens to me actually quite a bit. I go to a social situation and they go, and friends, close friends would be like, what do you do nowadays? And I've learned to never put the burden or feel bad in that instance, because the reality is everybody's got a lot going on. I'm sure you've folks got a lot going on all the time. I do too, lots of people do. And we just need that repeated reminder of like, well, actually, this is what I do. And maybe follow up with a compelling story, or like just reminder in general. And to those of you, and sometimes when I hear repetition, I'm like, yeah, right, like boring, like why should I repeat myself? To just like kind of like answer that part of your brain. Don't feel that you have to repeat the same stuff over and over again. This is why you have your story bank. And I want to give you a fun game to play with nobody else but yourself. From today on, you can pick 2 or 3 stories that you develop from your story bank and do an experiment of sprinkling the same stories with different variations in all the assets that represent yourself. Whether it's you show up with a job interview and tell that story, or info interview and tell that story. You show up on your social media and tell a bit of storytelling. You go to an in-person networking event, you put it in your website. That game will allow, if you embody kind of like, I'm going to like experiment with this kind of mindset, you kind of start like putting a distance on the story that you tell and kind of be able to assess which story is actually more compelling. And I find this game really fun because eventually what will happen if you repeat it, like you try it long enough, you get someone else to come to you and tell a story about something that you put it out there about yourself that you didn't think that you told them in person. That for me is a success. So to summarize, remember I told you at the end, I want to give a mantra almost for every single type in the audience. For the parallel universes, my encouragement for you is it's okay to show up with one universe at a time. You don't need to feel this burden that you have to explain all that you do. I know that they're all amazing, but you don't need to feel this burden that you need to do it, cram it in one session. It's okay to strategically pick which side. For the constellation type, yes, there is a connection why you jump from different interests. There's something that link like your one experience to another experience. And I want you to find the connection yourself and own it so that you can connect the dots for others rather than have others validate those dots for you. And for the solar system folks, your dedicated interests to a craft matter. Show your expertise and authority, or just like if you're starting out, show why you're so passionate about that, and that will move people. And finally, for Spiral Galaxy, making a contribution to your team, organization, or the specific field that you're in matters to you, and I know that. Channel that and tell in a story format what is the kind of impact and contribution you want to make. And that brings me to the end of this presentation. I look forward to connect with you further. I know that we are just really, like this is really a starting point to have this conversation and broaden the possibility of storytelling about yourself. Here are all my contact information. I can be found on LinkedIn, Instagram, or my website. I also host a podcast on all things related to creative career development. It's called the Everyday Talent Podcast. You can find that on pretty much all podcast platforms or on my website. Thank you. I hand it over to Stephanie now.
Thank you so much, Betty, for walking us through those really helpful creative career principles and for sharing your own experience and your story. You know, as someone who has gone through so many different iterations of my own career, you know, it was really beneficial to reflect on how I've honed my path and really what progress I've been able to make. And, you know, it's interesting, you know, I think we've talked about this before, you know, had I taken this quiz 2 years earlier or 5 years earlier, I wonder would I have been categorized in a different archetype, and how might that have, you know, at that point, how might that have changed my story? So it's very interesting to reflect on, because I'm recognizing that there's still opportunity to deepen and expand my experience, both in support of myself and in support of others as well. So yes, thank you for helping us better understand how we can, you know, uncover, clarify, and really shape our stories to tell others about ourselves. This is very helpful. Thank you.